Good afternoon, or do we in Florida call this good evening? I don't know what 5 o'clock is in Florida. Is it an afternoon or is it an evening? I don't know. Anyway, I'm happy to see members on the panel, and I know I can't see the audience members, but I want to welcome you to what we think is about the 19th webinar we've done since the start of the academic year, and this one's a special one. We have an extraordinary panel here with us today, and I look forward to introducing them in just a moment. I do want to share with you that this is, in fact, an official part of what Stetson University refers to as Values Day. And in preparing for this webinar, I did want to brush up on my Stetson history to understand its origin, as well as its transformation over the years. So if you'll indulge me for just a minute, every year Stetson does celebrate Values Day, typically in the month of September. But because of the global pandemic, it was postponed until today. And we're delighted that we're able to be together. It's a single day dedicated to the university's commitment to its core values: personal growth, intellectual development, and global citizenship. Values Day is also a part of a continuing dialogue among students, faculty, and staff, as well as members of our community, so that we can share, learn, and appreciate the university's core values. And in order to support the ability for the entire Stetson University community to attend, in order to make everyone ability to attend, we cancel classes and we close offices. The entire Stetson University community is expected to participate in this day of reflection, community, and action. And in acknowledgement of the history, this was formed in the early 1990s by former Stetson University president, Douglas Lee, who was Stetson's 8th president. And he created a town hall style meeting that was meant to discuss diversity and inclusion at the university. In 2004, the name of the event was changed to Diversity Day. And in 2012, Diversity Day was re-envisioned to be focused on all of the university's core values and was thus renamed Values Day. So there is the brief history. I want to introduce to you the folks that are on the screen. And maybe you'll just wave your hand when I say who you are. Andy Eisen is the visiting assistant professor of history and assistant director of the honors program. In 2015, he co-founded the community education project at the Tomoka Correctional Institution, a men's prison not far from here in Daytona Beach. He's taught classes and workshops ranging from immigration history to transatlantic slavery. Rina Tovar Arroyo has been with Stetson for 16 years and currently serves as the assistant vice president for development and alumni engagement. Rina has been a member of the Volusia Remembers Coalition, something we're going to highlight here today in our session, since its inception 2 years ago, and she currently serves as the fundraising chair for the committee. Daisy Grimes is a member of the Volusia Remembers Coalition steering committee, as well as an alumna and former first lady of Bethune-Cookman University, also located in Daytona Beach. She is a well-known community advocate and has been involved with numerous organizations, such as the Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration of Florida and the East Volusia NAACP. Daisy Grimes has 25 years of administrative service, including serving as a congressional aide to Stetson alumnus, U.S. Representative Clay Shaw. Sharmaine Jackson is an assistant professor of sociology and was the host and is the host of the Race in the 21st Century set of panel discussions, very popular and important panel discussions that delivers stories that engage us on issues related to Black lives and racial justice. Dr. Jackson has been a postdoctoral associate in the Department of Sociology at Yale University, where she has conducted research with the Urban Ethnography Project. I am delighted that you are all here. Did you have another thing you'd like to say, Sharmaine?
Yeah, I'm also the director of the Africana Studies program here at Stetson, so I also wanted to make sure we gave a acknowledgement to that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sharmaine, and I'm sorry it wasn't in my notes. Welcome all of you. We're delighted that you're here, and you don't want to hear me talking a lot, but I do want to remind all audience members that we very much want the last 15 or 20 minutes or so of this session to be as interactive as possible. So please do take advantage of the chat function. We'll remind you of that in a few moments too, but that's really the thing that I think all the participants really look forward to, is the engagement with the community. We do the best we can with this virtual format, so please do that. So let's get right to it. Andy, I believe you're first on our docket, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Roellke. It is really an honor to be here. So I've got a short PowerPoint slide that I'd like to share with everyone here to talk about some of the work that I do with the Community Education Project, which is Stetson's higher education in prison program. I co-direct the project along with my colleagues, Dr. Pamela Kapas-Toro, Dr. Melinda Hall, and Dr. Yelena Petrovic. Currently, I'm very proud to say we have about 20 CEP students who are enrolled at Stetson University. They take Stetson classes, earn Stetson credits. Prior to the pandemic, we were working at Tomoka CI 4 to 5 days a week, working with students, teaching, providing workshops, and having study halls. I think one of the things that I'm proudest about concerning this program is that the community here at Stetson has really embraced it. We've had more than 45 Stetson faculty members and staff visit Tomoka to teach a class or provide a workshop or give a guest lecture. It's really been wonderful to see how faculty, staff, and administration have come to embrace higher education in prison here in Central Florida. We can go to the next slide. The project that I want to talk to you about today is one that I've been involved in since 2018. In that year, I began working with students, incarcerated students, on researching slavery and Indian removal in East Florida. The project emerged out of a visit that I had to at De Leon Springs State Park. Perhaps some of you have visited there. It's best known for its Serve Your Own Pancakes house. When I visited the park, I was really taken aback at how poorly the histories of slavery are told in the visiting center. There's just a small display that has 2 panels, which was supported by a Florida Humanities Council grant, I think sometime in the early 2000s, that deal with slavery. In the text on those panels, they focus on only one of the 3 enslavers at the plantation. And most importantly, they cast enslaved persons as afterthoughts. In fact, on the panel, it says the names of slaves are long forgotten. And for me as a historian, I saw red. I was so angry that whoever had created these panels simply didn't care or didn't know how to find the names and try to tell the stories of the persons who were enslaved at that plantation that's just 7 miles from Stetson University. So I spoke with our students at Tomoka CI, and we devised a plan to begin studying it. And so you can see in the photograph on your left, that is a 1929 inventory list that has the names of enslaved persons under John Stark, who was an enslaver at the plantation. CEP researchers began reading books on slavery, studying secondary and primary sources. They began transcribing tax records, inventory lists, bill of sales, deeds, wills, and journals. And to date, they've recovered more than 200 names of people who were enslaved at that plantation. If you look at the right, before we had a computer lab, everything was done by hand. It was truly a labor of, in some ways, kind of a labor of love in trying to recover these names and stories, but in other ways, just labor. If we can go to the next slide. So one of the things that I most appreciate about this project is that the students who have been doing this research are not just finding names, but they're beginning to tell some stories. And since I only have a short period of time today, I'm just going to very briefly tell you one story, and that's of a family who were enslaved at De Leon Springs, who were enslaved at the Spring Garden Plantation, Anthony and Malia Stark. They were both born in South Carolina. They were then forcibly relocated to the Spring Garden Plantation in 1853. We only know small fragments of their lives, but in an incredible testament to freedom, Anthony Stark was able to vote in 2 elections during the period of radical Reconstruction. He bequeathed in his will to his sister Malia property, who appears in records, and 2 records. In 1855, you can see that she is valued on this inventory list at $300 as literal property. In the 1910 census, she shows up again. She had been living in the first free Black settlement in Volusia County, Garfield, in what is now Deltona. And so far from the names of slaves are long forgotten, which is currently at the panel at Spring Garden, we're beginning to tell stories of the people who were enslaved. If we can go to the next slide. Malia and Anthony are likely buried, well, Malia is, and Anthony likely is buried in this abandoned cemetery in Deltona. This is where the Garfield cemetery, this is where the Garfield community was located. I had the chance to trek out into the woods there with Dr. Bob Sittler a few years ago and take these photographs. I think it is a painful metaphor of how Black history in general in this area is regarded, that these folks lay forgotten in this abandoned cemetery. If we can go to the next slide. Through archival research, one of our students was not only able to recover the story of Malia, but he was able to connect her to Mr. Leon Clements, who is Malia's great-great-grandson. In this photo, he's reading a booklet that incarcerated researchers prepared for him about his family's history. He had not known that his people were in Florida prior to the Civil War. He assumed that they had migrated here afterwards. And so our students are providing this incredible public service to Mr. Clements and his family, who can now begin to tell and trace his family back further than previously he was able. If we can go to the next slide. Our students who are incarcerated who do this research also have benefited our non-incarcerated students here at Stetson. Here in this photograph, I was able to take students to the Spring Garden Plantation, now De Leon Springs Park. And they have a list of the 200+ names that were recovered. And in this photo, they are reading those names out loud, commemorating those lives that are, again, not forgotten. If we can go to the next slide, and the final slide for today. Our students have been working tirelessly on an exhibit that are telling these stories. And this, I put it up maybe 10 days ago at the Enterprise Museum. You can read on the photograph on the right, it says, "The exhibit honors the men, women, and children enslaved at Spring Garden Plantation. You are not forgotten." And there's a roll call of the list of names that they've recovered. I would ask that if you have the opportunity to please visit the museum if you're in the area. I started this talk by saying that the Stetson community had really embraced this project, first and foremost by, of course, our incarcerated students who are doing this incredible research, but also by Stetson faculty who made this possible. So Madison Creech literally taught art design so that the students could make this beautiful presentation, an exhibit that you see here. She worked with Antonio and others to share with them how to use the software and elements of design on how to make this exhibit. Dr. Sittler, who I mentioned previously, shared research. And all of this is to say that projects like these aren't done by one person or even a few people, but it takes a much larger community to make it happen. And I feel very fortunate with the faculty who have supported this project. So I would like to conclude now with a very brief piece by one of our students, taking me about 2 minutes to read. This is a student, Antonio, and here he's reflecting on his work and kind of becoming a historian. He says, according to Marissa J. Fuentes, the author of Dispossessed Lives, enslaved persons are silenced in the archives by narrative told by their recorders. They are not allowed to tell their own stories. The, quote, violent systems and structures of white supremacy created devastating images, end quote, of enslaved people that erased them and led to their social death. What can we know about them is limited by what and how those in power decided to document them. I was drawn to the Public History Research Collective because of the similarities between enslavement and modern incarceration. Thinking of this likeness within the context of Marissa Fuentes' discussion of the archive has led me to explore a deeper motivation for partaking in this project. My desire to buck against the narrative imposed on me by the penal system. Since my incarceration 2 decades ago, my footprint on society has ceased. Instead, my life has been lived within the legal and correctional archives. The legal archive began with my arrest report and my mugshot. I then made a brief appearance in court records. Since then, certain aspects of my life have been documented on my contact card, a record of minor infractions kept in my dormitory's officer station, and disciplinary record kept in the dormitory, and disciplinary record kept within the Florida Department of Corrections database. The department does not record positive activities other than educational and vocational programs from which lifers are largely excluded. My achievements as a self-directed learner and my personal growth are completely ignored by these archives. I have heard of prisoners stand before parole and clemency boards with squeaky clean disciplinary records and shiny resumes of program completions only to have those achievements considered suspect. As a convicted felon serving life sentences, how will my story be told by a historian searching through available records decades from now? As a lifer, it is expected that I will not have anything meaningful to contribute to society or academia. The Florida Department of Corrections suspects that men like me are either violent gang members or a drug user. My decision to avoid drug use, violence, and gang membership are directly related to my desire to define my identity against the expectations of corrections professionals. My pursuit of higher education through self-directed studies and now as a Stetson CEP student is integral to my self-definition. My submissions for academic conferences, article for process history, and work on the Public History Research Collective's exhibit on the Spring Garden Plantation are opportunities to leave my own trace in academic and public archives that expand the narratives that may be told about me in the negative legal and correctional archives. While I can't extricate myself from the prison industrial complex, I am challenging the narratives that are propagated by it. Thank you.
Professor Eisen, thank you so very much. This is powerful learning and powerful contribution to the historical narrative that we need to make sure is exposed to a wider range of people. So thank you very, very much. I look forward to our Q&A with you as we move forward. I'd like to turn now to my colleagues and friends, Rina and Daisy, to talk about your experiences with Volusia Remembers.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Roellke. I'm pleased to be here this afternoon in my role as the fundraising chair for the Volusia Remembers Coalition. And I'm very honored to be here with a dear friend, Daisy Grimes, who is one of the most beautiful humans on the planet, and Andy Eisen, who's also a member of our coalition as well, and Sharmaine. So earlier today, during the values program, some of our coalition members, Sam, Nazarene, Jordan, and Grady, hosted a very powerful program about our work. And if you missed it, I highly encourage you to watch the recording. It's very powerful. I'm going to share with you a little bit about how the Volusia Remembers Coalition began through story. I think story is very powerful, and I want you to open your hearts, feel this, and hear this. A number of the coalition members had a similar experience to what I am about to share with you, as synergy and humanity brought us together. So it was the summer of 2018, and I was invited by my dear friends, Greg Sapp and Tammy Bryant, to join them on our joint law school and undergraduate civil rights travel course, which was created by Professor Emeritus at the law campus, Bob Bickle, who is a truly wonderful man. One of the most impactful days of my life happened on that trip at Brian Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. My experience alongside our students started out at the Legacy Museum, which chronicles the kidnapping and enslavement of Africans to the unjust policies of mass incarceration and sits on a site in Montgomery where tens of thousands of enslaved people were ripped apart from their families, warehoused, and sold alongside farm equipment and cattle. The museum shows the horror of slavery, which I was never really taught, and it punched me in the gut. I knew it intellectually, but I never knew it on the soul level. Then after a few hours of silent contemplation at the museum and a lot of tears, we walked to the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. The memorial is constructed of over 800 steel monuments, one for each county in the United States, where a historically documented racial terror lynching took place. The names of the thousands of lynching victims are engraved on the columns. When I stood there and I read the names of the lynching victims, I realized these were not even their true family names. Those names had been stripped away from them when they were kidnapped, when their ancestors were kidnapped. These individuals bore the names of their family's slave owners: Houston, Chambers, Smith, Tanner, Burnett, Davis. I can't describe the horror I felt when I read the reasons for the lynchings. I like to pause there so you can feel that. As we moved through the memorial, I felt sickened and ashamed. It's emotional that, quite frankly, I did not know this part of our country's history like I should. I knew the concept of slavery and lynching, but I truly had no idea on that soul level. The weight of the experience was pressing down on my heart, and I was longing for something I could do to educate others like me about this unspoken history, the history that took place right here in Volusia County. And then, as I exited the back of the monument, I saw them. I saw the acres of monument replicas lying on the ground at the back of the memorial. I then heard the words of the EJI staff telling the students that I was there with that their hope was that the National Memorial inspires communities across the nation to enter an era of truth-telling about racial injustice in their own local histories. They told us that eventually we could claim our Volusia County duplicate marker to begin telling this truth, and I had hope. So fast forward 8 months later, and we received the email we had been waiting for. The Equal Justice Initiative was ready to begin their Community Remembrance Project. Volusia County could now begin building our own coalition to tell our hard history of racial terror. And 2 years later, on this day, we have built a diverse coalition of beautiful souls who live and work in Volusia County, who are committed to telling our county's hard truth. For if we do not speak the truth, how can we ever get to reconciliation? Together, the Volusia Remember Coalition will talk about the 5 documented lynchings that we know took place in Volusia County. We will speak their names: Lee Bailey, Anthony Johnson, Charles Harris, Herbert Brooks, and Lee Snell. We will love their families, we will tell their stories, and we hope we will begin to heal and reconcile in the process. Our coalition is based in love, and our coalition strives to build beloved community. And we accept that repairing our present requires an honest look at the wounds of our past. So our coalition has 3 main goals. The first is to honor, the second is to educate, and hopefully reconcile once the truth is told. We are working on 3 distinct projects. The first is a soil collection project, a historical marker project, and a monument placement project. We're going to share the website link with all of you later so you can read these a little bit more in depth. But now I'm really pleased to turn this over to my dear friend Daisy Grimes, who's going to talk a little bit about her own experience and about our soil collection project for Mr. Snell.
Thank you so much, Rina. And thank you, Mr. President, for inviting me to participate in this very needed and worthwhile project here at Stetson University. I am responsible for chairing the soil collection for Volusia Remembers. And let me share with you why I got involved with Volusia Remembers. But I was asked to be a part of it. Initially, I was very hesitant because I felt like I was involved with too many projects that didn't do anything. So I wanted to make sure it was going to be worth my time. And going to that first meeting, there was something that hit me, that this was a group of people in this community who had come together and decided that it is time for us to acknowledge, to reconcile, and to work to move on. The first thing that hit me was to acknowledge that these things happen. That has been a very difficult, I don't know why, process in this country, to acknowledge that slavery really happened, that lynching really happened, that people suffer injustice in this country, America, where we say all men and women are created equal, but it was not that way. So I was really impressed with getting involved. So I got involved and I got more involved. And then I started reading all of these things that Andy was sending to us about these many victims of lynching. And I was appointed over the soil collection. That's when I learned that, hey, we're talking about going back to the site of the actual lynching. And we're going to dig up soil where these incidents occurred. And we're going to recognize that these were not lynching victims. These were human beings. These were American citizens. Our first soil collection will be on February the 27th here in Volusia County. As you can see, there is the invitation. We are going to go and we are going to bring dignity to the life of Lee Snell. And Andy, I cannot thank you enough. You have actually made Mr. Snell real to me. I mean, I feel like I know this man and I have a responsibility to make him, humanize him in this community. He was a husband. When he left his home that morning, he never thought that he would not be coming back to his wife. He was a veteran who had fought a war in this country, came back to Volusia County, opened up a small taxi cab company to make a living, a decent living, was a member of the Veterans Club, was a member of the AME Church. He left home that morning and accidentally a little kid ran in front of his cab and was accidentally hit and died. Mr. Snell stayed there and waited for the authorities to come. He was taken to a jail in Daytona Beach. A mob came. Supposedly then the constable was going to move him out to take him to a safer place. Did Mr. Snell argue? No. He willingly went on because he thought that he was going to be taken to a safer location. Traveling down 92, which we call International Speedway, but about 3.5 miles outside of Daytona Beach, the two brothers overtook the constable's car. Mr. Snell was told to get out and run by the constable, say, get out. As soon as he opened that door, he was shot in the knee. The two brothers came and stood over him and shot him multiple times in the back. I can imagine when I went to that location and I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, how did this man feel? He knew when that car stopped that that was the end of his life. He knew that there was no way out, that he was going to be killed for something that was an accident. But more than that, he was not going to be able to have his day in court. He was not going to be able to go to where we say justice is. Mr. Snell was killed right on Old D-Land Road, what we call Old D-Land Road, in 1939 on February the 27th, we're going back to that site. We're going to dig up that soil and we're going to remember him. We're going to let his great-grandchildren know that your great-grandfather did not die in shame. He was a well-respected resident of Volusia County. He served in our military. He was wrongfully killed. And his trial, which is again another devastating, and I don't want to start crying, but I tell you, this even hurts more. The day of the incident, the sheriff said he recognized the two boys. That's documented. He recognized them. And the records have shown us that when they went to court, the same sheriff said, no, I can't identify them. I can't identify them. Yet he had earlier. They were acquitted and went free.
Yep.
This is what we are doing on February the 27th. And how do we move on from something like this? We have to recognize it. We have to say it was wrong. And we have to make a decision as citizens of this country to acknowledge that it was wrong. To say to African Americans and everyone that was lynched in their family, we are sorry. We are sorry. That is one of the great problems in this country, is that we have never, white America has never said to us that they are sorry for what they have perpetrated. And it continues today. It continues today. So I am pleased to be able to work with Volusia Remembers. And I know that in the words of the founder of Bethune-Cookman University, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, the one that I try to emulate every day of my life, that what will change this world is that when we learn to love each other unconditionally, that we work and understand what true tolerance is, that we love mankind, accept all of their differences, and work together as brothers and sisters to make a difference. Thank you so very, very much.
Daisy, on behalf of Stetson, I want to thank you for your very moving testimony. I also want to thank you specifically for two things. One is that you said yes to this project, and the other is that you have said yes to partnering with Stetson as we make these histories better known. So I want to thank you for both of those things. And I will never forget what you just said, which I think is a lesson for all of us. When we learn to love each other unconditionally. I wrote it down and I'm going to remember that. And I did not know that that was part of your experiences at Bethune-Cookman and part of that story. So I learned a lot today and I thank you for that. I'd like to turn, if I could now, and I know everybody can't wait to get to the discussion section, but we have a wonderful presenter in Dr. Sharmaine Jackson. I'd like to turn the screen over to you, please.
All right, thank you, President Roellke. And thank you to everyone who has spoken before, very moving words. I think in every of those stories, they speak directly to me, not only as someone who thinks about these issues all the time, who continues to fight for social justice, but it is also part of my lived experience. So to Rina, you can add Jackson to that name, those list of names, right? That's my surname. Doesn't come from, it's also a slave name. To Daisy, how do we move on? We aren't finished, right? I mean, I think you echo that, right? So much of 1939's story we can see today in 2021. Right? We can't even begin to think about how we move on when we continue to recirculate the past. Are we going to be sitting here in 2020, telling the stories of people today? It is our choice in the moment, right? Our past shapes our present. Our present is in our hands as to what our future will be. What do we leave? What legacy are we going to leave? What legacy do I have for my daughter? What legacy are we leaving for our children? What are we teaching our students? What will they teach their children? I don't know. These are our choices. This is within our control and in our hands. How do we learn and grow from the past? So I did this panel on story, right? I'm a big proponent on story. I think empathy is extremely important in being able to get another human being to choose, to bond, to connect with another person who is unlike themselves, to say, I am going to care about you and your situation and circumstance, even if it's not profitable, even if it's not rational, even if you are not my group. I'm going to do it because it's the right thing to do. I think story can come in many different forms, through visual stories, through written stories, through oral stories. So I think they're very powerful things. They tell us who we are with all of this historical work that's going on. The stories that we have for ourselves continue to evolve. I challenge us all to change that narrative for the future. So the panel was my attempt to think about how to have a conversation about race that wasn't oppositional and that could break through to people that race organizes every single aspect of our lives. It is not something that belongs to Black people or people of color or the other. Everyone has a race, and it's organizing our relationships. It organizes every institution in our society. So I invited people. I think they're going to drop a link to a YouTube channel that's part of a website that's in the process of being built. So it'll continue to evolve. The last thing I want to say, because I do want to get to Q&A, I think that's probably the most, I think you all want to have that in the audience as well. To this question of truth and getting to the truth, I will say that my dean, Elizabeth Scomp, and I are in the process of working on a new sort of workshop that kind of comes out of this project. I'm thinking about a concept called Ubuntu, which is an African philosophy. Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela, in thinking about restorative justice in South Africa. Ubuntu really speaks to the sense, the way in which I best understand it is that my humanity is intricately tied to yours. So if I rob you of your humanity, I rob myself of mine. In order to do these kinds of things to another human being, there is an implication to me, which then in turn leads to a motivation, right, to stop in order to restore my own humanity. So anyways, we're in the process of working on that. So that's all I have to say. I think this is a great panel. I'm very grateful to be a part of it. And I hope that it sparks some interesting conversation. Thank you.
My sincere thanks on behalf of Stetson to each and every one of you for your work. And I am eager, like we all are, to get into the discussion. And so in addition to the questions we got in advance, there's been some emerging comments in the chat, and I'll see if I can do my best to facilitate our discussion. First, a lot of incredible commentary here about how much the audience members have appreciated these narratives. So kudos to every single person on the screen. Thank you for these contributions. Let me ask a broad one first that came in through the chat, which is about what is the responsibility of or opportunity for higher education more broadly and for Stetson University specifically in moving this critical work forward. Maybe we'll start with the Stetson piece because we're most familiar with Stetson. We can certainly apply this to the broader landscape of higher education, but as a living and learning community, what are both our responsibilities and our opportunities that lie ahead as this important work unfolds?
I have, there's something, mine is real short. What Andy talked about with our community education project, that's an area that I would love to challenge everyone to learn more about, to get to know our students at Tomoka when we can. With the pandemic, it's been difficult. But learning about the mass incarceration that has happened over the decades, and 3 strikes, you're out. And there's just a lot there to be learned about and heard and felt, and know who our students are out there. So that's a piece that I think that we have a responsibility to our students at Tomoka to do and to love. That's where I wanted to start with that.
Good. Other perspectives? It's a big question. It's a big question, but I would love to hear other perspectives.
One of the things that came to mind when Dr. Jackson was speaking about what are we going to think about, or we won't be here, but in 2120, like how will we think of our legacies? I think we can do some of that work historically, and I do with our students. What happened when the Ku Klux Klan was literally running Volusia County in the 1920s? Where was Stetson? What happened when Lee Snell was murdered? What happened when DeLand, when Black folks in DeLand marched downtown and sat in Woolworth? Where were Stetson students? Where were Stetson faculty? And sometimes those stories are surprising and inspiring, and other times they're not. But I think one way that we get at thinking about our legacies in the future is to be honest about what we've done in the past. And it's very simple for students, for example, to say they would have marched with Dr. King when we know most white folks didn't. And so to be really thoughtful about where Stetson has been, I think is a critical step into thinking of where it could be.
Thank you. Sharmaine or Daisy, any further reflections?
You know, I want to say something based on what Andy said, where Stetson was. And I'm going to speak from my personal experience. Coming here in 1966 as a student at Bethune-Cookman, at that time Bethune-Cookman College. And I'm pleased to see Stetson doing this now. You don't know how it makes me feel good to be able to even work with staff members from Stetson. Because when I came to Bethune-Cookman as a student, you dare not, as a Black student, go to DeLand and dare walk on Stetson's campus. Right. We just did not do it. We were told you may get killed, lynched, raped, and all of that. And that was in 1966. So if I was saying something to Stetson University, I would say continue doing these type of projects, but pull in your African American students, make them feel inclusive, let them know that they are an important part of the total curriculum at Stetson University, and not just a student who came there to fill out a quota or anything. Meet with them and see what they're feeling about being a minority on a majority campus, because it's truly different. It is truly a different. And I think it's doing these kind of programs, but it's still sitting with them one-on-one and see what they're feeling. I think you'll find some interesting things if you met with your students and just ask them how do they feel about being a student at Stetson, and do they feel included in the total lives of Stetson.
Thank you, Daisy. Any final reflections on this particular question, Sharmaine?
I just have one, a couple of quick comments just to piggyback off of Daisy's comment there. I have stories of people in the 90s having this similar kind of experience. So certainly we have to think a lot about how history is shaping our present. And again, as a sociologist, I'd say what responsibility do we have in the contemporary moment? Because I think in terms of what's happening in the moment, is, in reflecting on MLK, everyone celebrates him, but he was extremely hated. Most American, he was at Time Magazine, the most hated man in America. My daughter was doing a lesson today for her online homeschooling, and there was a quote she was reading me, she didn't understand, from John F. Kennedy, talking about going to the moon. And it was that we choose to do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Right. So what is our responsibility? Not to take the easy path, not the popular one, right? But to dig in and do the thing that might be unpopular, but is right. So that's all I have to say.
I like that very, very much. And I just wanted to share some other suggestions that came in via the chat so the audience knows that we're hearing and listening. First, some more kudos. One of the most engaging panels I've seen at Stetson. Earlier today in the Healing Hard History workshop, it was mentioned that Stetson currently has Robert E. Lee's name on Sampson Hall. As a community, how can we make an effort to interrogate that and that tribute and what is appropriate to move forward? I would like to know more about Stetson integration during the period of when the first students of color came to Stetson. What was that like? What were their experiences like? And what can we learn from that? We often look outside the university to systemic matrices of oppression, but what about our own self-examination? And I think that's been a theme here, frankly, in this panel, has been that critical self-examination that can help educate us further about avoiding these challenges in the future. And if I may be so bold as to add my own 2 cents on this question of what can higher education and what Stetson University can do, I have to say that I'm truly energized by the conversation today because I think there's tremendous, tremendous power in our own community in place-based education, in community-based education, much like the work that CEP is doing, much like the work that we're doing in trying to get the Wright building to be rehabbed. There is tremendous power in that real work, side by side, with people that don't necessarily look alike, but that can do it together to promote not only a rich education, but extraordinary collaboration. So that's, I'm getting too evangelical, but it's precisely this form of education, it seems to me, that Stetson has great potential to make a contribution, both inward looking and outward looking. So thank you for that indulgence. A few more questions in the chat that I think are good, and feel free to chime in with it. Someone asked a specific question, and I must confess that I'm not familiar with this history, the turpentine industry, and what the turpentine industry might have had in terms of an impact, particularly of students, of young people and older people that identify as Black. Andy, I think maybe that you tackle that? I saw you nodding your head.
So yeah, it's a really interesting question, and it's one that I think connects this conversation in some ways. And so after slavery, one of the major industries in this area was the turpentine industry, and the vast majority of the workers were incarcerated persons. And so I think there's a real link there between there is a link between what happens to freed people following Reconstruction and the emergence of new industries like turpentine and the need for free labor through incarceration. And then, so I see that's kind of one of those places where the conversation is being connected from some of the work that our students and researchers are doing on slavery, the connections between the lynchings and white supremacist violence that ruled this area in the post-war period, and then kind of to the present, kind of thinking about our current incarceration. Florida has more than 97,000 people currently incarcerated. More than 200 people have died in prisons during COVID, and these institutions are linked together. And it's one thing to say they're linked, and what I like about this panel and appreciate about all this work is the stories are really powerful. That it's not just some abstract claim that these things are linked, but it's the stories and the individuals and the people that here locally that connect it, from the enslaved persons, Malia, to our student Antonio talking about how his life will be remembered as someone with a life sentence. These people are linked.
Thank you, Andy. And a question came in the chat, which was from a student that spent time at historically Black University and wonders out loud, and I think, Daisy, this is connected to something that you said about the history, is that a Bethune-Cookman student would never dare go into DeLand or set foot on the Stetson University campus. How do we remedy that? You know, this kind of connects to how can the broader higher education landscape collaborate with one another, particularly if we're neighbors. You know, half hour is not too far away. So I think that's a legitimate question. And I, as a relatively new president, you know, would be very eager to think about ways in which we might collaborate in the sharing of faculty and the sharing of students and so on and so forth. So I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that, either from your historical perspective or from a contemporary perspective.
Well, I know with Volusia Remembrance, and Rina is aware and Andy is aware of this, before the pandemic, we had talked about having something that I call hard conversation.
Yeah.
And we would have that with students from Bethune-Cookman and students from Stetson doing hard conversation and sharing their thoughts and views on systematic racism, going to PWI, how you feel, you know, but put those students there to do hard conversations. And I think once we start doing programs like that, getting students to get in depth with how they're actually feeling, it will be a beginning. It will be a beginning. And I know that's something we still say that we want to do, Rina, and after the pandemic is over, because we didn't want to do it virtually. We really want the students sitting there face to face to talk about that. And I think even having co-ops with different faculty members coming in and doing joint classes together would be a way to merge that. And I've talked with interesting, and Rina knows I'm always doing something out of line, but I talked with our concert chorale director, who is from D-Land, Dr. Lane. They're going to perform at our Saw collection. And I said to him, oh, Dr. Lane, wouldn't it be great when we do the Saw collection in D-Land that we have Stetson choir and Bethune choir together singing and participated in that? And he said, oh yeah, I'll be welcome to it. He said, do you know who's over? I said, no, but I'll find out. I said, but I'm going to recommend it. And so I think it's doing that. Just people being bold enough for us to say, let's do this. As you said, Dr. Jackson, let's be bold enough, even if it's something we haven't done and no one thinks it's right. Let's be bold enough to say, let's do it. My mother always told us, do the right thing, even if you're the only person doing it. Do the right thing.
Thank you so very much. And I also somewhat selfishly want to say that I also believe in what you said about the power in just working together. I even think about the performing arts, and I think about ways in which we can come together over, mutual celebrations and the way that can move communities together. So thank you for your comments. And I want to turn to Dr. Jackson, because Daisy, you referred to the hard conversations. And one of the questions that came in advance was, how do we do that? How do we have the hard conversations in a way that is respectful, that allows people to make mistakes, right? There's that concern that you're in that difficult conversation and you might make a mistake in that conversation. So how do we spread the love in a way that those hard conversations can take place?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that question, President Roellke. I will say, first of all, expect that you're going to make a mistake.
Right.
I mean, if we had the answers, we wouldn't be having the conversation. So accept that we have different ways of communicating. Okay, so not everyone's going to be communicating on the same page. That's going to take some time. So the expectations of communication are going to be different. Who's at the table? Right. Sometimes we don't, we stack the table. We set the agenda in a certain way to contain and control conversations. That is because it's safe. Get uncomfortable. We have to get uncomfortable. So that means vulnerability, right? Being able to be vulnerable, being able to say I've done something wrong, and being able to forgive someone else who's done something wrong, right? Because it's a twofold piece. I'm not a master. I think I'm probably stuck, the restorative justice track or this peace and reconciliation. Daisy talked about saying sorry. I've done some work in Australia that also has a reconciliation project, a long-term reconciliation project going on with Indigenous Australians. And the importance of the apology. The apology is the first step in the wrong, right? Really getting to that last piece. I think I get the pieces, but forgiveness, compassion, letting things go, release. I mean, that is how we move through and break those cycles and create something new. But it is oftentimes the hardest one. It's hard for me. It's hard for others. And there's a lot of there's a lot of pain. I think we want to move to those spaces too quickly. We have to understand there's process. There's white people's process or Western processes, you know, and there's the process of Black people, of, you know, indigenous processes that are very different. And so we have to honor that we have different processes and to allow that to happen. But it can happen if we don't move in this linear kind of pathway, and that we do put at the table all parties, not just those who are necessarily going to reflect back our own values. And that can happen in many different contexts and from different sides. So that's my little bit there.
Super helpful. And I am gonna have one more question that I'm hoping each person can answer. So be ready. But first I wanna share something from the panel, from the chat. I'd also like to add these great ideas. These are all great ideas. Of course, what we can do as an institution is continue our work of educating, teaching students the hard histories, teaching them to think critically about past and present, teaching them to ask difficult questions and think about the connectedness of the past and the present. I thought that was a very articulate way to describe what we can do as an institution of higher education right here at Stetson. So here's a question I'm hoping you can close us with, and it's an interesting one. It is, if you could go back to yourself into 2019 and give some advice to yourself, because you now know what happened in 2020, what would that advice be? So the title of our Values Day is actually Hindsight 2020. That's the title of our thing. Do you have any advice you would give to your own self if you knew what you know now based on our experiences in 2020? It's a very difficult question, but give us a snapshot of what kind of advice you might give to your own self in 2019.
So one piece of advice.
Go ahead, Andy.
So we all jumped in at the same time. I'm sorry, please.
And say this, 2019, as an African American Republican, I would speak to my Republican cohorts and tell them boldly why the Make America Great Again logo was so offensive to me. I would not have been as quiet and as accommodating with that in 2019. I would have given them a history lesson that it was offensive. Nothing was great for my grandmother, my parents, or anyone in my ancestors. So Make America Great Again did not include me. It said to me, you want to leave me out. That's what I would have done in 2019.
Thank you, Daisy. Andy, would you like to contribute to that?
Sure. I guess I would just tell myself to really pay attention to working with those folks who you can work with. Find the good folks doing good work and real work, and really concentrate on doing work that matters with good people, and focus on that.
Thank you, Andy. Rina, I'm turning to you next, and Sharmaine, I want you to take us home. Rina.
I think I would tell myself, remind myself, it's okay to be vulnerable and to not be afraid to say the wrong thing. When you're vulnerable and people see who you are in your heart, that it's okay.
And Sharmaine.
My last bit would be, hang on. That moral arc is about to bend and it's going to be okay.
I want to give you all a round of applause. Thank you so much. This is clear, based on the chat, based on the content, based on the emotion that we brought to the table here today, that this is an ongoing conversation we must have. So I thank you all for your contributions to it. I do need to highlight for the audience some upcoming events. Black Student Association events. Again, let's not forget that this is in fact identified as Black History Month. And the BSA has stepped up, as they always do, with some wonderful events listed on the screen there. So please do take advantage of them. Some of them include collaborations, which I think are wonderful, for instance, with Hillel and others. So please do take advantage of these events that are upcoming. And our second annual Black History Month celebration, 1619 Fest, Orlando. For those not far from us, Saturday, February 13th and Sunday, February 14th. Let's also not forget the incredible memory project, Volusia Remembers project. I believe the date was February 27th. And that is also something not far away and critically important for our community to remember. Breaking Bad's Poetry 2021 Women of the World Poetry Slam Festival, Saturday, February 20th, 1 to 5 p.m. Black Girls Run Virtual Run and Bike Ride, Saturday, March 20th and Sunday, March 21st. Soil Collection Ceremony, honoring Lee Snell. You stole my thunder. I already mentioned it, but here it has its own slide, which I'm pleased to say. Saturday, February 27th at noon. If you were moved at all by this session, and I believe many were, if not all, please make an effort to attend. The Roellke Report live webinar, Safer Campus Task Force and budget discussion following our Board of Trustee meetings this week will be on Thursday, February 25th. Again, an hour-long session. We are moving it to 4:30 because we examined the course schedule, and this will allow more people to attend. If you would like Values Day cultural credit, it's due by Monday, February 15th at 11:59. The link to the form can be found in the chat. I sincerely thank our panelists, and I sincerely thank the 200 plus members of our community that attended today's webinar. Thank you, stay safe, and stay well.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.